Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the build of two Skymaster F4 aircraft. I just wanted to do this perspective so you can see exactly how we've got everything planned out. We've got 3 build tables for each plane. We've got stuff everywhere. It's awesome. Absolutely love it. So stay tuned, guys, and we will continue with build video number 2 of the Skymaster F4 Phantom build series. All right, guys, last video, if you missed it, you should watch it. But last video, we covered all of the equipment that's going in the aircraft. We did all the weights as well, too, which was awesome and pretty cool to see that stuff. And we worked on the wings first. So we did the reinforcing to the gear mounts. We redid the air system for the inner gear door. So what we're going to do in this video is the first thing is we're going to hop on the servos for each wing. Now remember, we're doing 4 wings, not just 2. So we're doing the servo installation. When we do the servo installation, we'll be able to get our horns mounted here. And then on the newer F4, we'll be working on the light installation as well too. So lots going on in this video. Again, if you missed my last one, it's a little bit scattered because we're kind of jumping all over the place, but let's dive into this. Okay, so before we start with servos, we need to get our Jeti stuff updated. We need to create new models in the radio. So we're going to create 2 F4 models. We're going to update all the Jeti products. We're going to get the central boxes set up so we can plug in servos and get that stuff done. So anyways, I won't show you guys on camera. We're just going to do the normal setup procedure and update procedure. But once we get that stuff done, we'll hop back into getting the servos for the aileron and flaps installed. All right, so the Skymaster ailerons here, very, very standard setup, nothing special. You basically have these aluminum brackets. You install them on your servos. Now here's one of the differences between the old kits and the new kits. So the old kits, these brackets run flush with the indented piece for this hatch cover, which is no good. So you try and screw these down, you're going to have the screw bumps to deal with. So we've got to countersink these guys on my kit, on the old kit. The new kit, it is indented a little bit. Maybe I'll show you on this side. So we've got a little bit of an indent right there, which allows the screws that come in the kit to hold those down. So the new kit, we don't have to do anything. The old kit, we have to do some countersinks on 4 of these guys. So we'll just use a drill press, add some countersinks so we can use some wood screws that go in there. All right, guys, so I think in the last clip I said we need 4 of these guys. We actually need 8. So I'll just show you my process here. So I've got my servos laid out. The output shaft goes as far away from the surface as possible. So I get my my 4 brackets, or 2 brackets, sorry, installed, Loctite on those guys. And then what I'll do is I'll hold this down against a flat surface, because what happens is these brackets don't sit down generally all the way. So you want to get this as nice and square as possible. So I'll hold this down on the table and then just slowly go through and tighten all of these screws up. And then I don't do the full tightening until I'm happy with it, looks good, and then I snug them up. And there we go. Now the manual says you need to use a really long servo arm. Well, the problem is the manual originally shows these brackets mounted to the top surface of the wing, which is no longer valid. So I'm going to figure out what servo arm we're going to use, but we don't need something too crazy, probably a 1-inch servo arm. So anyways, we'll get that figured out, and we'll get the other flap, or the right flap servo, done up as well. Okay guys, so this is a pretty typical setup here. You go to put your servo in and it doesn't fit. So usually what you need to do on these Skymaster kits is give the mounts a little bit of a sand. And the other thing you want to do is, if you look at where our servo wire comes out there, you want to give your mount a bit of an angle. So I'm also going to sand that angle so our wire is not pushing when we drop the servo in. So you want this to be a decently snug fit, but obviously right now there's no way for us to get that in. So I'll just take my Dremel and we'll just clean up around the perimeter here, some of this glue. And once we get that done, we'll be able to drop these servos in and kind of check out and see what size servo arms we're installing. Now the whole point of getting these servos and everything installed first is then you can take a straight edge, you can run that straight edge line to your surface, and then from there you can get your carbon arm mounted on the actual surface itself. So there is a reason to do this. It's to get the geometry perfect. All right, so we've got our servos set up here. What I've gone with, and this is just what I have, and it's convenient to use. So ailerons, we're going to use the Seacraft arms. The arms that come with the KST servos, I'm actually quite impressed with them, and mainly the red arm here. The red arm is very, very thick. It's actually quite a bit thicker than a standard nylon arm, and it's got like a reinforcing stripe that runs down the center. So I was going to use this, and then I found the Seacraft arm, so I'm going to use the metal arm. We're going with clevises on the servo end, and we're going to have ball joints on the other end. Now I've also got the flap servos set up, and they are matched as well too. So what we've done is taken one of the 1-inch MKS servo arms. Now these holes don't work for clevises, they're too big. So I had to drill my own hole right there, and I've sanded down the arm. It used to be about that long, and that's what we're going to use on the flap side. So servos are set up and sort of paired, and what we can do now is look at getting the right wing servos installed. We do need to figure out the direction that we're going to be running the wires. Now the wires on this plane, pretty much the easiest route for the servo wires is going to be right here. There's one balsa piece of wood kind of in this area, and all we have to do is make a small hole through there, and then our servo lines can come right out here. Now on my wing, or the old wing, all we're going to have is our servo connectors right there, and then our air connectors. And if you look at the fuselage here, basically we have one hole there and one hole here. So this would be lined up right with this hole. So ideally my servo leads are going to come out right here, and air leads, they basically come out right in this area, is where they were always coming out. So we're probably going to open up these holes more so our excess can go inside the fuselage, because if we have our excess sitting inside the wing, it's going to be a pain because this is quite tight with the wheel. So this gives us a good idea where our leads and stuff are going to go into the fuselage. Now on the new aircraft, this one here, we've got that same hole in the aft portion of the plane where our servo leads would come out, and then we have to make a hole here for our air leads, but same kind of idea. And when we do this, if we're going to run our air leads right there, which is pretty much the only spot to run them, probably going to put a little shield down here just to keep it away from the turbine and make sure we don't have any hot turbine area connecting with the airlines, which would be bad. Now the only difference on the new wing is we've got that same cutout back here for the servos, which is great, but we're also going to have a light lead coming out of the front here as well too. We could possibly run that all the way down. We'll have to take a look at that and see. The downside is there's like structure right here, and I don't know if we want to punch a hole through that. So we may have a separate connector in the front section here for the lights, which is probably what we're going to do. Anyways, we'll give that some thought. So now at this point, what we do is we get the servos installed. We're going to make matches to the other wings. So we've got to do all the same stuff here. We've got to open everything up. And once we have that done, then we can start taping out our lines and stuff. Now we also, the next set of wings we'll do exactly the same thing with, but that'll all be done with MKS servos. Now, one of the interesting things is the length and size of these servo or control arms that mount in the surface. So old plane right here, new plane right there. That's a huge difference in control arms. Very, very surprising actually. So if you mount it in the same kind of location, pretending that that's the skin of the wing, that's kind of the difference right there. So pretty significant. I'm going to give that some thought. All right, guys, so the very first wing here is ready to cut the slots for the control horns. But what we're going to do on each of these wings is we're going to get this one set up to this point. We'll get the other one set up to this point. We'll learn on these wings, and then we'll go over to the other wings. So what I decided to do with the horns was keep the horns that came with each of the kits. I don't think it's going to be a problem. These ones, I put them all together and drilled my hole. Yes, my hole is a little bit offset, but that's okay. It works. And they're all the same, which is important. I made up some servo extensions here. So what I did was on the old plane here, I used an ashlock connector. So I've got one of each style, male, female, and these are the leads that we're installing. It's just a short little lead. The point of putting a lead here, you could actually probably use the servo lead that comes off the servo to this point, but the Aileron one might be a little bit short. The other thing is, the way I did this, I've got the female portions of the servo lead just CA'd to the side wall right here, and the servo leads just plug in. So it's super simple. If you ever have to change these servos for any reason, just unplug them, and it's you don't have to mess with this wiring at all there. So anyways, this is done. Up to this point, obviously. So what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you the process of how I do this. So the series of lines that we've got here, when I put a straight edge against the servo arm, this skinny line to the left is the line that actually I first drew with my ruler. And then I put a arm here in the clevis and just kind of found its happy center point. And the thick line is where that clevis is happy in the center. So we're going to go with that line. We don't want to be adding any sideways force to the clevis. Now this isn't a ton, but better to have that clevis sitting in its happy spot like that. Same thing on the flap side here as well too. I didn't draw all the lines, I just put the rod inside the clevis, and that's where it likes to sit. This side with the carbon horn's a lot tighter because we drilled that out to a 1/16 hole, and this one is the standard 2mm hole that comes in the Seacraft arms. Now, this one's got a little bit of side-to-side play, but front-to-back play, there's nothing. So that's how we're setting that wing up. Now we're going to do the same thing on that other wing of the old plane, and then we'll be ready to install the carbon horns. Now what we'll probably do is we're not going to do the carbon horns until we get the other wings done as well, and we'll do the carbon horns probably as a last step on this plane tonight, and they can cure overnight. So that's progress. Now time for the left wing. All right, guys, so we've got all of our slots cut in all 4 wings, and we are good to go. So there's a couple things I'll point out to you here. And this, I think, qualifies for a tip time. And this tip time is brought to you by Trusty Bent Screwdriver. Thanks, Trusty. This is a good one. All right, so a couple things with these slots. When you cut these slots, just use a Dremel bit, and you got to get it deep enough, obviously, for your control horn to go in as far as it's supposed to go. Now, usually the slots here, or the material in the surface, is balsa. So in this case, we've got a section of balsa here where the control horn is going to bond to. So what you do is you take some thin CA. once you get your slot cut and everything, and you soak that balsa with thin CA, and it just soaks it up like a sponge, and that'll strengthen up the balsa, give it a little bit more strength, more durability. Now, this is very, very typical. This is not an uncommon thing with most kits, but Skymaster, you see it quite a bit. So in a case like this, our balsa actually goes from right here to here. So they completely miss the area. So I can see the edge of the balsa right there. We're pretty much on all of the flaps, on all of the wings, we are wide open right here. So there's no balsa down there. So we got a couple options for this. Really what we need is we need a way to keep the epoxy in this area. It will bond to the balsa that's right beside here, so that's fine. But what I like to use is a sponge. So I'm going to cut a couple pieces of sponge and I'll just show you guys what we're doing here. All right guys, so basically what we're doing here is we've got balsa on this side, we've got an empty space on this side. So all we do is take a piece of sponge, and the goal here is to get the sponge and basically make a wall right here. And then what we'll do is we will soak the sponge in CA, I find works really well. And just makes a little space that holds the epoxy. If you don't put the sponge in there, what happens is you got to use just so much epoxy, and it will generally run over into the rest of the part of the surface or whatever you're dealing with. So the sponge works wonderfully. So once we get it inserted in there, what I'll do is I'll just trim that off now. And this is just this is a grouting sponge actually is what it is. So and then I take a really, really sharp brand new blade, cuts it no problem. And then we want to take that sponge and move it over to create that space. In this case, the sponge disappeared, so we just put another piece in. The nice thing is, if the sponge is floating around in there, really doesn't matter. There we go. Perfect. So I'll try and show you if I can. There we go. So the sponge is just making a wall, essentially, for our epoxy. So what I'll do now is I'll soak that in CA, and we'll spray some kicker in there, and we're good to go. So then what happens is when you fill this with high sol, or epoxy or whatever you're using, fill that with high sol, put your surface in there, and you've got a nice buildup of high sol. It's not going to drain out. It's going to bond to all the other things that it's touching, especially the balsa piece that's inserted in there. So that's my solution for situations like this, brought to you by Trusty Bent Screwdriver. All right guys, so we've got all of the horns glued in place. Now the old horns are a little bit difficult because there's no little ridges on the front or the back. So getting them positioned is a bit of a pain because they can sink down too far. So I've let the high sol kind of set up a little bit. We're using 9462 here, and it's still very wet, but kind of using those rods to hold it into position, and taking a measurement from the base to the hole, looking down the side through the holes. You can kind of see if the angles match. So anyways, doing as much as I can to make those work out well. The new horns over there on the new wings are actually a lot better because they've got a little ridge on the front and the back. So as long as your slot is a good size, they stop. Now, I don't generally use nozzles, but in a scenario like this, the nozzle is very, very helpful. Trusty works great, but for a scenario like this, having the nozzle and actually getting the material all the way down is very, very helpful. So that wing's done. That wing's done. and the new wings are done. So these guys are way easier to deal with. And I left the rods in place here just so you can get the horn centered, right? So now we know exactly when that the carbon horn is exactly in the right spot. So on the new wings here, I'm going to pull the tape off now. And when I'm done that, I will also pull the tape off of the old wings. And we'll let those sit overnight and cure and continue tomorrow. All right, guys, so we get to start moving on with the wings here. So we're looking at the new wings right now. Control horns are all cured and solid, which is absolutely awesome. Now we got to do a couple things here. Number one, before we start going too crazy finishing up this wing, we need to make sure that this control arm is going to be long enough. Now the aileron, I'm not so worried about. The flap one, I've taken measurements and stuff, but I don't know if I trust it. And the other thing we have an issue with is the actual aileron itself contacting items with interference. So the aileron is hitting the side here. So on mine, on the old one, we had to do a little bit of sanding, but on this one, everything's so close. We're going to have to do some more sanding on those areas. So that's something we have to deal with. But what we need to do is we need to get these wires hooked up, but I want to make sure that I can run the wire for the light to this location. So that's going to be my next challenge. I'm going to cut that the fake light out, and we're going to see if we can get a wire run to this location just to minimize everything, and we'll just have one connector, one of the 9-pin ash lock connectors, and that would make life really easy. So that's the next challenge. So I'm just going to take a pull saw and we're just going to cut this light out here. Not a big deal, and that kind of gives us access to see what's going on in here and what kind of access we have into this area. All right, so here's the pieces just after they were cut out, and that's what they look like. And that's what our little area looks like right there. So we need to take the Dremel and clean off a bunch of that glue, and that's going to open that area up where we can install the light and hopefully get our wire run through the wing. So we pretty much have a clear shot all the way down the leading edge here, which is nice. So initially I tried going in the light side, didn't work, so I just ran my my wire this way, and we were able to fish it all the way through. So that is a positive thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the wire first and get it routed all the way to the root of the wing, and that's awesome. Very happy about that. And then we'll start working on the other wing, and then we'll start working on the reflectors. All right, so we successfully got both wires run, which is awesome because now we can do our connector here, our 9-pin connector, which is great. So other thing I did on these wings before I went any further was I talked a little bit about having to open up the gap here. So you can see these were done quite tight. So the only thing when you're doing these gaps is you don't have to open up the entire thing because of the hinge line and everything here. If you look at the aileron here, when I go like this, it kind of travels at an angle, right? So the only spot you really need to sand is this top, or well, I guess the underside of the wing. So you kind of sand it at a bit of an angle like this because it interferes when it goes this way. And then on the flap, same thing. So over here, you sand this surface kind of at that angle. And then now, when the flap's in the up position, there's zero interference with the aileron movement. And we need 25 millimeters up and down with aileron. So it's pretty straightforward. To do the sanding, I just use my Milwaukee multi-tool with a sanding thing there. And you just have to kind of manipulate these things to work, so to be in the right position to sand it. So anyways, we're going to do the other wing, and then we will get the connector installed, and then that'll allow us to get our servos hooked up. All right, guys, so I was just thinking to myself, yes, this whole process building two of the exact same planes at the same time Definitely adds to the length of time it's taking to do everything, of course, because you're building 2 planes. But it's nice because I can do all the experimentation and figuring out on mine, and then the new one over there for David, we can do it 100% and nice and quick and easy and perfect. So this is the process I normally use for figuring out situations like this. Now, I'm not going to go into tons of information on the Jeti system, but what I will show you is the flap setup. So there's lots of different ways to do this. This is how I learned to do it, and it works just awesome. So we use the max setting, and that's kind of an interesting one because you have to go and you have to find the max setting. You're not just putting it on a switch. So anyway, so we've got it assigned to our flap switch. For flaps, I use SD. Okay, and you can see what happens on the max screen there. And so unless you're a Jeti user, this probably is not going to make a lot of sense. And then we're using the adjustment here to adjust everything. So for example, flaps off, we're at minus 155. Takeoff flaps, 117 minus. And landing flaps is minus 76. That servo is buzzing because my carbon horn is tight. So anyways, this is contrary to how I started setting up the flaps on the Jeti system, and this works absolutely awesome, and I think it's way better. So anyways, yeah, if you have any further questions on that, I guess reach out to me, or I don't know if Harry's got a video on that or not. But so what we've done here is we've got kind of everything basically set up and leveled and centered. So I've installed my horns here, and they're just plugged into the hole that they go into with the clevis. Now the point of this is we can now take some carbon rod and we can get our pieces cut that go over top of our stainless or metal rod, and then we're going to epoxy those in place so it's a nice stiff setup. And that's generally how I would do something like this, and that's how we're doing it. So we've done a little bit of the setup right now. So we've got our aileron set up in the dual rate menu. So we've got 25 millimeters of travel there, and the flaps are kind of roughly set up where we've got flaps off, visually what I think takeoff flaps should look like, and landing flaps. We've taken 45 degrees and measured it right there. So those are kind of set up right now. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut those carbon rods and get them installed. And I just realized I failed to show you where the max is. So I've cleared out this switch here, which is flaps off or normal flying flaps. We've cleared this out, and this is the screen you come to. So you hit the plus button, and we're going to go into logical switches. Now logical switches, if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see log max. That's what we're going to use for our flap control. Now I've got this already set up in my default model. So if I go to set this up and nothing actually works, if the servo's not responding, then what I do is I go into the max and I reverse this channel. So let's see if it's actually working. Yeah, so we're still good. All right, guys, both wing surfaces have been completed. And this is by far my absolute favorite setup for control horns. We've got 2 clevises, carbon horns on both sides, and good quality servos. Like, this makes up an absolutely zero play movement. So on the old kit here, absolutely perfect. On the new kit here, absolutely perfect, zero play in these surfaces. Now, if you're using crappy servos, there's going to be probably a little bit of play. Both of our setups here are absolutely awesome. So we've got that completed, which is good. Next thing we're going to do is put the gear back in. Now the problem is this one air valve that comes off the side like that. It does need to have a cutout over here to actually fit it. So we've got to take our Dremel and grind out some of the reinforcing that we've done on that one side. So there's room for that, that hose to actually work. If you don't do that, the hose is bent like this and it'll kink the hose. So, all right, so next thing we're doing here, the gear's back installed, but we need to set our toe in on our wheels. Now, if you measure the base of the fuselage where the wings attach, the back portion of the fuselage or wings, that part of the fuse is 5/8 of an inch narrower than the front. So what I did here is I measured 7 1/4 inches out on the back end and 7 inches out on the front end, and that's going to get us fairly straight because we have to split that 5/8 between the two sides. So all I'm doing now is I've got those tape lines and we're just lining it up to the tape line, then we'll add a little bit of toe in. Now I'm happy that Skymaster left the mounting piece here loose. They didn't glue the piece to the leg. It just kind of floats, which is good because otherwise you would have no way to adjust toe in. So we're going to get that set up on this leg, and the leg or strut is really close. All right, huge shout out to Kelly, my buddy down in Montana. Thank you, Kelly, for pointing this out. Sent Kelly an update picture of the first wheel that has been mounted, or strut and everything, and he pointed out that it's backwards. And I didn't look at any scale pictures. I just assumed that Skymaster cared and they would do things the right way for us. But the legs, or the spokes of the wheel, are supposed to be on the inside, and the leg itself is supposed to be on the outside. So this, the stock way that Skymaster included all of the gear, whether old or new, is incorrect. All right, now we are done one side of this wing. We flipped everything around, so we kept the same door. We took the other leg and put that on, and this actually works out way better. If you leave it the way that Skymaster ships it, this tire is basically hitting the door here, so it really is not correct, and this of course is the scale way to do things. The other thing that this allows is the brake line to have a better routing. So the stock Skymaster way is to come down the leg here, and then it just gets squished when the gear retracts. This is my preferred way to do it, so I drilled a hole through here, just the right size for the brake line. We've got a keeper down there, C8 in place, and this folds nicely and doesn't pinch the line. Not that it matters, but it's just more of a preference or a long-term thing. So anyways, we've got our toe in added on here. The gear door is installed, all that stuff's done. So that is perfect. Now we need to match that on all of the other wings. So the other wing on the new kit and the other wings on the old kit. All right, guys, just working on the other leg here. When I pulled the gear door off this leg yesterday, these the pieces were extremely tight. I actually sanded them out a little bit. It looks like they put some adhesive or something on there, and it absolutely destroyed the paint finish on this leg. But fortunately, we found a perfect match. So there's, I always paint the back of spoons. This tip comes from you guys, and right on here what it is. So this paint is Tremclad Rust Paint Primer Galvanized Metal White, and you can see there it kind of has that antique-y white color to it. And compared that in, they got this from Home Depot, compared that in the store, and it was like a perfect match. So anyways, we have repainted this leg, so that's good to go. So we're going to install that one in the wing, and then we'll get the old kit legs installed as well. All right, guys, all 4 wings have their gear all installed. One of these old wings here, this rear hatch was a little bit kind of misshapen, so it wasn't closing on the leading edge there, and it's still not 100%, but it's better than it was. So what I did was I bent a piece of piano wire and glued it on there, and if I'm happy with that, I'll take a piece of fiberglass and just lay it over top of that. But that just helps bend the door so the leading edge isn't you know, a scoop basically. So looks kind of funny from this end because you get your angle going in, but it's a lot better than it was. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our layout for the pylons out. Okay, so this is the pylon guide. It gives you all of the dimensions for the wing. So, all right guys, so in my ordnance kit that I got off my friend, Skymaster included the wooden dowel, so hopefully this is enough to do all of our wings. In the new kit, there was no wooden dowel included, no instructions, but the ordnance kit did come. I found on most Skymaster kits, usually the hard points are already mounted. The F4s are not so. So what I did to get my hole here was use my Align All tool right there, and I went to number 9 on the little measuring device, and that worked out perfect. And we're a nice snug fit in there, and actually we are sitting right against that rib, which worked out just perfect. So that is going to work awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the holes on all the wings, and then we will get those pieces of dowel installed. Now I'm not too sure if their measurements here are 100% correct. We've got one at 50, one at 38, one at 26, one at 30. So, all right guys, it is the next day, and our mounts, our hard points for the pylons are all cured, and that worked out awesome. So some of the wings are good, like my left wing there is perfect. My right wing, this back section right there, there's a big lump, so we need to sand that down. And it's the same thing on one of the ones on the newer wing. So we're gonna get those sanded down. We'll get our pylons installed, and that'll be the final step for this video. All right guys, pylons have been mounted. Now the pylons are one area that I would highly suggest not using any of the Skymaster screws. These things are gonna all go in the garbage. This is kind of an example of their crappy hardware. So if you're doing these up, these are the standard Phillips screw, and you do them up mildly tight, the head will break off, and that's totally in the norm. So always throw those in the garbage, no good. What I use when I'm mounting the pylons is I will use a Robertson screw. Now I realize this is a Canadian thing, but the nice thing about the Robertson screw is you can use a number 4 by 1 inch screw. The head has tons of grip with the Robertson bit on it, and usually the 1 inch is a good size. You're getting about 3/4 of an inch that's actually going into the dowel. In some cases you could use a longer one as well too, but that's generally what I use to mount the pylons, and it works really, really well. Everything ends up being nice and solid. So pretty straightforward to mount the pylons. It was actually easier being able to see the dowel versus when Skymaster installs it and it's painted over. Easier to mark out and everything. So pylons are done on all the wings, and they turned out awesome. I think I'm going to keep all my stuff black. I think it's kind of a cool contrast. I realize that it's not scale, but I think it'll be a nice contrast when it's on the underside of the plane. So anyways, that stuff's all done, and very good. The wings are almost complete. All right guys, and that is everything for this second episode in the pair of F4 builds. We got lots accomplished in this video, which was really, really good. Wings are practically done. In the next video, we're going to be starting off with the wings, and then a bunch of random stuff. We're going to move into the tail section. But last steps with the wings is we have the cover plates to install, and then on plane number whatever it is, the newer version, we've got to make light lenses for them. And on my wings, we just need to install the cover plates. So making awesome progress with these pair of planes. They're going together very well. It's a nice new challenge for me as well too, because I've never done an F4 before. So anyways, guys, thanks for all your support. There's been a few of you that have sent out super chats or whatever they're called, donations by YouTube, and I really appreciate it. That's super cool. To see those things come through. So thanks guys for watching and supporting the channel. I appreciate all the comments and all the awesome things that each of you guys contribute to the channel as well too, and I appreciate you watching ultimately. So thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next video.